Fix your hair. I'm starting to rock, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Still got a few minutes before it starts. I'm just getting the broadcast ready here.
Regular meeting of Town of North Wilkesboro now in session. Let's ask the good Lord for guidance and let us pray the prayer our Savior taught us, all in one voice together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We can remain standing, face the flag. We never brought it.
Art gallery.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, let's just go ahead and say it anyway. Chief, if you would please.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be
I
seated.
know it's not because we don't have one.
It's on the roof.
You got it.
Additions and deletions to the agenda. There is one, and Mr. Hooper and I spoke about this before. And we'll put that down, the consideration of the business, and that's going to be to select possibly 2 dates for the retreat for late January, maybe early February. Facilitators, may be an issue, but anyway, we'll put that on the agenda. We need a motion to add it. Oh,
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. Sounds good to me.
Discuss it.
And approval of the agenda.
Mayor, make a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of item D under section 10.
Thank you. A second, please. All those in favor? Motion carried. Okay. That brings us to the general public comment period. Mr. Shepherd. If you like, sure. Just for the record, when you get up there, state your name. Just be recorded, please. Sit here. Anywhere you like.
Good evening. My name's Neil Shepherd. Here to ask you to revisit the multifamily housing zoning in North Wilkesboro. And I haven't looked at the code lately, but for several years, I know up until a year or two ago, and I'm not sure if anything's changed lately, but I don't think there's anywhere in town that multifamily housing, apartments, condos, whatever it may be, is allowed by right in town. And so I think, and feel somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that any apartment complex, unless one burns down, they're building it back, requires a special use permit, which is a kind of a long drawn out process. You have to have the plans prepared and you have to go through a lot of procedure and time before your project can get an up or down vote, whether it can or cannot be built. And so I know there's been a housing study and I know there's a demand for housing of all types, including multifamily housing. But I don't think there's anywhere in the town or the ETJ, if somebody walks in the door today and says, I'm ready to build some apartments, they can't, because they have to go through a rezoning process. And to me, that seems a little odd that we can't find somewhere in town that would be okay to build apartments. The obvious choice to me seems to be some kind of commercial district, say, for instance, general business, that if we just added multifamily housing as an allowed use in general business or also in highway business or wherever you would like, that way there's some certainty. Somebody has a piece of property they want to put under contract that they know they can build apartments there. I think there are many uses in town, restaurants, fast food, grocery store, gas station, whatever it may be. You can look it up. It's allowed in general business. So if someone's going to buy this property, they know they don't have to go through any special approvals. If they want to build a grocery store, I can do it. But that just does not exist for apartments. And I don't really know why we wound up that way. The only thing I can think of is maybe there's the fear that apartments are residential. So if you allow them and it somehow is allowed in a single family neighborhood, that would kind of disrupt the neighborhood. I can understand, well, maybe that needs a special use process. Maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But it seems to me like there should be some way to improve the code to where it provides some certainty for someone that may be interested in building apartments in North Wilkesboro. Me particularly, take for instance, the Block 46 former American Drew property there. We've had it under contract 2 or 3 times to talking about building apartments there. And it comes down through, it's a long process to go through basically full site plan approval before it even gets voted on to determine if you can build it or not. And just that lack of certainty, North Wilkesboro is not what you would call a very strong real estate market. And so it just kind of gets pushed to the side. And so if there was somewhere that was allowed by right, then our local market would then just be competing with other markets. And right now, I feel like we're already at an economic disadvantage, just the market. And then we're also at a disadvantage because of our own zoning code. So that's what I'd like to ask you folks to, or planning board, whoever it is, to take a look at.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd.
Sure.
That's what we discussed.
For sure.
You
Yes.
guys may ask anybody any questions for Mr.
Have
Shepherd.
you approached the planning department about the rezoning?
Not in the last, probably two, I think in 2019, I submitted a request for a text amendment for this purpose, and it didn't go anywhere. So trying again.
Commissioner Church, if you will, want to yield on this discussion, I have a presentation I would like to make during the emerging topics portion of the meeting. So I had asked Mr. Shepherd to come by and kind of get this ball rolling, and I have some thoughts that I would like to present during that period.
But the closing, thing for you to think about is right now, you cannot build apartments anywhere in North Wilkesboro, period, without you guys approving it. But there's lots of other things, grocery store, gas station, probably lots of other more disruptive things that can be built. And that just seems a little out of whack. And so I would think if there was some reason that it was written that way, something that folks were afraid of that would happen, let's just address the thing that folks were afraid of and set it off to the side. But if there's something that can be allowed, let's go ahead and set that out in the code. You can build apartments here. And if you wanted to have special circumstances or whatever it may be that's in the code. But I think it seems like the code is written thinking about a single family neighborhood, not thinking about a business area. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Anybody else?
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7, meeting minutes. I assume everybody's in the package long enough, and they've got a chance to read the minutes. Need a motion to,
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as stated.
I'll second it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Item 8, town manager's report. Mr. Hoover?
Yes, sir. Got a brief report that Commissioner Parsons requested at our last meeting. And that's an update on the state budget and how it affects us. So I've written a report here that's actually got quite a bit of information, but I'll ask Mary Elizabeth to pass out to you. So if you'll take some time after the meeting to read that, I'll just go over the highlights here. There were 3 significant specific money allocations to projects that we care about. The first is the Marketplace Mural, which I've mentioned to you all before. I couldn't find the original budget document, and that's because it wasn't there specifically. It was there by reference, but it is mentioned specifically in the Joint Conference Committee report, which supplements the actual budget document. And so you can see that image there on the first page is an image of that citation in the conference report. So $50,000 for marketplace improvements. We'll use it for the mural. You'll note in my commentary below there that there are some ministerial steps that need to be taken in Raleigh before that money can be appropriated. And once those ministerial steps are taken, the Office of State Management and Budget will reach out to us to arrange the exchange of the money. All right, moving on to page 2. Another item of interest, the North Wilkesboro Speedway. So just to clarify, we're not going to get any money directly from this. The county is going to be the holder of the $18 million appropriation from the state budget. The $18 million does come from the state's cut of the American Rescue Plan ARC dollars. And so it's subject to ARC requirements, which means It needs to be competitively bid. There are reporting mechanisms in place, et cetera. And the county will be responsible for all that. Again, the $18 million number that was that we ended up with requires no local match. And as you can see from the text there, its purpose is to help local government units provide water and sewer related infrastructure for the North Wilkesboro Speedway. John Yates and the county folks are working with the state and the feds to find out exactly what is eligible. So is it just water and sewer on the outside of the speedway? Or for example, if the speedway needed a private water tower of their own to provide sufficient water pressure at the facility, would that be eligible? The county's working to find that out right now, and I'll keep you apprised of what they discover. All right, moving on, water projects. You can see the appropriate citations in the budget document itself, including a specific mention of $500,000 for the town of North Wilkesboro. The administrative apparatus for this is already in place. And as a matter of fact, we sent in our application for this money yesterday. And so the state has it, and they'll proceed to approve or reject those applications and start processing them. We applied to apply this money to our ongoing elevated storage tank project. That in turn will reduce the amount of money we have to borrow, and therefore our debt service payments over the next 20 years. Early indications from the state were that is acceptable, but there is one provision of the ARP dollars that says you can't use it to pay existing debt service. Well, we're not paying debt service yet because we haven't started making the payments yet. We're paying for an ongoing project. So we still need them to sign off on our plan. But even if they tell us we can't use it on the elevated storage tank project, we got the water plant treatment upgrade project waiting in the wings that will apply it to. So one way or the other, we have a water project that we can apply that to. And I described that a little bit more in my commentary there. Turning over to the next page, there are some items on here that don't give us any money directly, but are some opportunities for us. Actually, the first one there is not an opportunity. I want to skip that one and go down to workforce housing loan program. So they're tweaking the North Carolina housing loan program and adding some funds from the budget to it. So that might be a possibility for residential development in North Wilkesboro. We'll wait and see. The Powell bill funds, of course, Powell bill dollars are funds we get every year from the state based on a formula that's, I think, half lane miles and half per capita. And so if you are a community which is losing population, which we are not, fortunately, your Powell bill allocation would get smaller every year until this year's budget, which, as you can see, they capped that and said it won't reduce here in the next budget cycle. On the last page, I want to draw attention to the Rural Downtown Transformation Grant Program. I think this is a good opportunity for us, and once the program launches, we'll look into that some more and see if we can find an eligible project for that. Okay, so those are the opportunities for us. A budget bill is oftentimes a policy bill as well, and in this case, the General Assembly inserted some policy measures into a spending bill that will have an effect on us. The first is second from the end there on page 3, limit harmony requirements for affordable housing. So in the future, as we go through the procedure to evaluate the appropriateness of affordable housing in our community, we won't be able to use harmony as a justification anymore. And then finally, the first one there under other items of note is the General Assembly has granted the Local Government Commission more power to oversee the financial affairs of municipalities. This is not going to affect us because our affairs are in good order, but it'll change some of the procedures that the Local Government Commission follows. It actually also grants the Local Government Commission the authority to rescind a municipality's charter. And they've actually done that already. A little town in Scotland County called East Laurinburg is no longer a recognized legal entity because their finances were in such bad shape and they turned down the help that the local government commission was offering them, that the local government commission exercised their power and rescinded their charter. So a strong state agency is now even stronger, and that's probably a good thing for the state of North Carolina because it keeps us out of trouble. Like I say, it's not going to affect us now because our house is in order, but I just wanted to tell you all about that, just so you know that they've got a little more tools in their toolbox now. And so those are the dollars that have been allocated to us. Those are some of the opportunities that this budget affords us. Any questions?
Thank you, Rob.
Yes, sir.
Just one, Mr.
Yes, sir.
I can't do it fast. On the committee report for the mural,
Mhm.
what was that, is there a timeframe on that?
We're still waiting to find out from them when we need to spend that money by.
Does it say anything about getting that money will be released or anything?
A month after the budget is certified.
Is it certified?
It's not certified yet, but I presume that's something they'll probably do before January 1. So probably in the early spring is when we'll be getting that money. And that's not so bad because we can't start painting the wall until the spring.
So that'll work out.
Maybe we can do something by the next meeting.
I'm trying to find out.
Please. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Hooper?
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Yes, thank you. If there are none, sorry.
Question,
Yes, sir.
the money we got to do a study for the parks. Where we at on that?
We are waiting on a third quote from a firm, and then we'll be able to choose by the end of next week and sign a
Next
contract.
week,
Yes,
by
sir.
our next meeting, we'll have a full update.
Yes, sir.
Good, okay, great. Anything else? And consideration of new business, law enforcement compensation, Mr. Hooper, is Connie here? She's down.
She is, well, let me see if she's,
Then Chief Thornberry.
yeah, I'm gonna promote Connie here so that she can participate remotely.
Okay.
And of course, Chief Thornberg's here. Before we start, I again have some more information. So our comparable agencies aren't on the same schedule as us, so information from them has been trickling in. And we got some updated information from the Wilkes Sheriff's Office this morning. So we've updated the chart that was sent out to you in your agenda. And that's what you got in front of you.
So that replaces this one.
That replaces that. Updates that. So Mayor, if it's okay, I've got a few introductory comments to make, please. I know that this matter is important to you, and that's why we accelerated it and put it on the agenda. But if you don't mind me saying, I think this is going to be a tough question. It's going to require a few conversations to answer. Tonight, we've got some preliminary information to share with you. And I hope we can get a sense of what your appetite is for some of the trade-offs that are going to be required to answer this question. And then we'll take those and create a more detailed proposal for you in the meetings to come. We've been running scenarios, but we don't know if the sort of variables of those scenarios are tolerable to you. And so we want to find out sort of what your goals are and plug those into our scenarios and bring those back. I'd also recommend that as we talk about this item, we do so with three things in mind: affordability, fairness, and effectiveness. I think those are all important things to be part of this discussion. Affordability, of course, is clear. How much is this going to cost? Like I said, there's a lot of factors that will dictate how much this is going to cost. It can be very reasonable, or it can be very expensive. But with that said, I just want to remind everyone of our fiscal condition. Last year, due to revenue losses from our interest income and so forth, we had to use some of our ARP funds to balance the budget. We do have some money in our savings account, but reserve funds or fund balance typically aren't used on recurring expenses, which this will be. So we're starting behind the 8 ball already when you talk about affordability. Fairness. So the data we'll show you tonight shows that we do indeed have wage pressures on our law enforcement positions, that we do have a lot of sunk cost when someone leaves, and that we've had some attrition. But I just want to make clear that we're feeling competition in every sector. We're feeling competition for all our employees. And that law enforcement officers are not the only employees that we have that require a lot of training, nor are they the only safety sensitive positions in our workforce. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I think most of our job classifications need to be reviewed if we want to stay competitive. We haven't had as much attrition in our other ranks, but I think that's just because we've been lucky. All right, finally, effectiveness. You know, token, this is kind of the antithesis of affordability, but effectiveness, you know, token gestures probably aren't going to do it. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, here.
Yeah, token gestures probably won't work.
Okay.
You know, I don't think a $500 one-time bonus is going to keep someone here if they've got a better offer somewhere else. So those are just my introductory comments. If I can draw your attention to the paper that looks like this that was just handed you. The latest information, of course, we have is the Wilkes County Sheriff's Office. We've updated both their hiring salary and their salary range. If you take a look at those two columns, you can kind of get a sense of what our main competitor agencies are paying. And so I hope that that will sort of give you a sense of where we need to go to be really competitive.
A long way.
The other things I want to mention is in your package, I sent you pages from our personnel policy. Those have to be considered as well before we take any action. And there are a couple of clauses in that policy that I want to review with you because they will have an impact on any decision we want to make. The first is section 3 under article 3 of the pay plan. This is kind of a dirty little secret, but I think it's worth talking about, and that is, even though our starting salary is already lower than our competitors, when someone starts here, they don't even make that much. They make 2.5% below the listed starting salary during a probationary period or as a trainee. Other agencies don't have that. And so I think that that requirement is something we should reconsider so that all our job classifications start at their listed minimum salary.
So that puts us behind 8 ball probably.
Yes, sir. The second thing in our policy is that we don't have a clause that awards people who are exceptionally well qualified coming into their positions. As you can see, both Wilkesboro and the Wilkes County Sheriff's Office grant 2.5 or 5% increases to their starting salary to candidates that have an associate's or a bachelor's degree. We don't have that. So we don't have any mechanism we can use to reward candidates with advanced education. So I'd recommend that we reconsider that as well to increase our competitiveness. Okay, if you'll turn over to page 12 to section 9, salary effect of range of salary range revisions. It talks about how when you shift the pay ranges, you've either got to pay people 5%, or if you shift the pay range, say 7.5%, you pay them whatever's more. I imagine in our case, it's going to be more because 5% isn't going to bring us up to the same level as these other entities. So that's just one other thing I wanted to point out. And then finally, section 10, transition to a new salary plan. If you read the 4 clauses there, and essentially what those mean is not everyone will get a pay raise. if you're already getting paid in excess of what your salary range is, unless the salary range is increased to above what you're getting paid, you're gonna stay where you're at. And I don't know if that applies in very many cases to us here. In fact, I don't think it applies to a few. But depending on how much we move the range, some people might not receive any increase at all. They'll just receive, they'll just stay the same. All right, so those are the initial notes I want to tell you. I'll conclude by saying that I alluded to earlier that the cost of this varies a lot depending on how many levers you turn. But I've run one scenario that I think is telling, and that is, what would it take to move our entry level pay range up to about what the Wilkes Sheriff's Office pays, and then move all other employees who aren't entry level a comparable percentage. And that cost is, when you add in all the increases in salary, the increased cost of benefits and so forth that we have to provide, that cost is around $220,000 extra per year. So if you want to set a target and try to figure out how to get there, that'd be a good one.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So, if I'm following you correctly, so we raised starting wage to starting salary 37 and change. And just people who make less than that now would get the raise. And if somebody's making $40,000 a year, they wouldn't get it. Is that correct?
No, sir. Although we could run that scenario.
Yeah.
If that's something that you all want us to look at, we'll look at that. The scenario I described is that we raise the starting salary from 32 and change, 37 and change. That represents about a 16% increase. And then we raise everybody else 16% too, so that they have a fair increase as well.
That's a, now we're getting into big money.
Yeah.
Maybe nice too, but what are we losing, Chief Thorne? Is it the entry level? Officers that we're losing? I know now that you're gonna lose a sergeant, a retiree, or I saw one case where a guy left for a 6-figure salary. That's very understandable, but
Yes,
I guess two questions. Like, what level are we losing? If it's the entry level,
it's,
and the second,
I believe the average is 5 years, is that correct?
I don't think we have the average for Anglo Creek, but if you flip your sheet over,
It's
Around 3.5 to 4.
2 years, 5 years, 6 years. One was here for 4 months, 4 years, 2 years, 4 years, 1 year, 2 years, 2 years.
probably around two.
I mean, it's just,
Very, very young, very.
we get them in and we spent on those officers, we lost a total of $159,000 in training. $159,000.
I know some are gonna lose that quit or maybe, whatever.
And it cost us, it cost the department $4,799 just to hire one officer and put them in a car and put them on the road.
That includes background check and everything, right?
Yes, sir. What that includes is, it's called FMRT. That's okay, let me back up.
This is in footnote number 2.
So the background check, actually, y'all are getting out really cheap at that, paying, there's 2 people down there certified to do that. There's myself and David Johnson. I can't do it because now I'm the chief, I have to stay impartial with it. David Johnson, who's part-time, he's agreed to come back and do it. He's doing it at $12.50 an hour. So you guys are getting out really cheap doing
We
that.
can make more than that.
Is that a is that a specialized skill?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, very specialized.
Certified.
Basically, he's just being kind.
Yes,
to the department.
he's a retired captain from the police department. And, it takes 80 hours on average, and that's doing one very quickly to do one of these backgrounds. So that costs $1,000 at 80 hours at $12.50 an hour.
Yeah, he needs, that's not right.
No, it's not right, but, you know, he does that for me. Because he knows I need the help. And, FMRT, which is the psychological, physical, the drug screening, all that, that's $695. We have $20 in postage. The equipment issue is $5,034, but the actual cost, because a lot of it we can reuse, the actual cost of what we have to buy for a new officer, because you have to get new shoes, you don't want to wear somebody else's shoes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's $2,145.
Okay.
We have to qualify them. That's $323. That's mandated by the state. Before we put them in the car, we have to send them to DCI training so they can run tags. That's $247. CJ Leach training is $123. OC pepper spray and baton training. We have to do that because if we give them a baton and they're not trained, it's a liability to the town.
Sure.
So that's $123. Same thing with the taser, that's $123. So, you know, like I say, before they put their seat in the car, we're at $4,799.
A roof to 5,000 before you ever turn the ignition on this car.
That's right. So for 10 officers over a period of roughly 2 years, you're $50,000 just in lost employees.
So,
So you can pay one officer for a whole year for what you're losing.
yeah, so it would, you know, I read this yesterday, today, and we haven't kept up. It's supposed to be done on a more regular basis, and now we are a good bit behind the curve with repair. And I spoke to, you know, the board about it, and we're gonna have to pony up, I think, but I would rather get by. You have to have more money for retention and recruitment both. And I think you're gonna give it to payroll, but try to, in my opinion, we should do this as efficiently as possible and spend the least amount of money we're gonna need to. And sure, I mean, there are people who are gonna say, well, the starting pay is 16%, and you got that. If you're making 34, you'll get up to 37, let's say, change.
Yes.
But to go over and above that, give everybody a raise, I think. You remember the story about the guy who had the vineyard, and he got the guys come in, worked all day, the last 3 hours, but he paid them all the same at the end of the day. You know, what you agree to is what you agree to. So I think that should be done, you know, carefully, and just, you know, just be very, very careful spending the money that we really, I guess, apparently don't.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then one more question,
Yes, sir.
and our competition is Wilkesboro and, you know, the county, and I see these other ones too that are fairly close, but those are the two main, these folks too would be Wilkesboro and the county. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, you know, one of the things with Wilkesboro we lose people to is the total free family health insurance.
I know, yeah, but and another question is, I wonder how many of our guys that have one, but most of them have wives and most of them work. If they can use theirs, we not
When they start having kids is when they start looking.
yeah,
Yes.
right, okay. So then, but we don't have 100% participation of the officers, right, on health insurance because maybe their wives have it.
It's not even offered by the town.
It's not not here.
It's,
No, I mean, family, they just have individual,
Yeah.
yes, we just have individual insurance.
but they could be, but participation is not 100%, they can be covered under their wives or not.
He's saying if their spouse has a job,
Yeah.
and you have insurance, does all our police officers take the insurance, or we have some that don't take it? So-
Gotta have some that don't.
Yeah, all officers have insurance.
No, it's available, but they all take it.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah, they all,
Verify that, but I'm pretty sure that's true.
okay,
yes.
that's all the questions I have, I know there are others.
And we're still continuing with buying 2 cars, are we still on the path of that?
Yes, ma'am. We purchased 2 cars this year. We'll ask for 2 cars next year and 2 cars the next year. It's
as long as we can do 2 cars a year, there'll be some years we have to ask for 3. That'll be because we'll have to replace some of the unmarked cars in the investigations division. But that will not be as often as the marked patrol cars because they don't put the miles on them like they do the marked patrol cars.
So I'd like to make a comment just on that. You know, we've got that program in place both for operational and recruitment purposes. You know, it helps us compete with competitor agencies, but it also makes our response time better when needed. But that grows the gap between the compensation for police and for other employees. Because other employees have to put mileage on their own car and maintain their own car and so forth. And so that's a benefit that is going to be given to only a portion of our workforce. So that when you think about this from a fairness perspective, that's something else that you have to consider.
I've got a few thoughts. I think our major questions we need to ask first is who / what pay should be raised? Should it be across the board? Should it be just the entry level people? This information right here isn't specific enough to really show us across the board. Once we decide who needs to be raised, we need to ask how much does it need to be raised? Do we need to be on par with Wilkesboro, or do we need to try to be on par with the sheriff's department? And what can we afford to be on par with, if anything? And then the third one is, how do we afford it? And that's the biggest question. And I don't even know if we have to answer that yet. We need to get those other two. I've been saying for months, I think having being the lowest paid force is not only bad for recruitment and retainment, I think it's a liability for the town because we need to be getting the best recruits that we can. And as far as the fairness side of it, I definitely think we need to keep in mind the whole organization of the town. But I also think that it would be not wise to look at each department to say that there's something going on in the industry of, in this case, police officers that may not be going on to the same extent in Department X, Y, Z. Now, I do agree that I think we probably should review those others. That's a different conversation, but I think we do have an issue here and we need to address this because this is causing us to lose people. It's costing us money. And I believe it's a liability. But I guess my first question that I would like to see, I don't know how we get to that, but who needs to be addressed? Is it just the starting officer's pay or is it department wide? And do we have to do it department wide if we do the starting officer's pay? But that's what we got to figure out. Because when you start throwing out some of these numbers, from what little bit that I know about the budget, I'm not an expert, I start thinking, I don't know how it could possibly do that, so.
Well, I've got a thought on that, Commissioner. Perhaps staff's homework is to go back and compare the gap between our entry level work salary range and our other salary ranges. And so if we discover that perhaps up in the range a little bit, they're closer, then we can leave those the same. We only find the classifications that have a big gap between us and our competitors.
And this is probably that third question I was talking about, but is there anywhere in the department that we could find some money? Do you know?
Yeah, we got some options.
Tell me, what is everything that we want? And everything, how much would it cost to do it?
I think that $200,000.
$220,000.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well,
I don't think we got any choice.
we know, we
I
got,
think we need to go ahead and make
Yeah, I
a
think-
decision and do it
and do it.
and work, and you figure out where the money's coming from.
That's a lot of money to figure out I mean, I think we need to do something, but I think finding that money.
But, well,
I think we need to take time.
we take too long to make decisions.
Well, where do y'all think the money should
Well,
come from?
okay, I know we're not going to vote tonight, we discussed this earlier in an agenda meeting, but what will the next steps be? And I know that, you know, it's been going on for months, so we do need to get this resolved and make progress in it. And it's something that, in my opinion, should be brought up every meeting, and have progress shown through every meeting so we get this done, because it's the problem has become a problem.
It's common, it is.
In my opinion. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Here's what I'd recommend. Staff will do our homework to figure out where, under what classifications the biggest gaps exist. That way you all can have some information on who to bump up and who can perhaps stay the same. The numbers I gave are, you guys know my expression, back of the napkin numbers. So we'll run some more detailed calculations to refine that number and make it more precise for a number of different scenarios. The one I gave you, the one for only entry level, the one for, classifications that have a similar gap. So we'll run a couple different scenarios, find out how much those would cost, and then we'll bring back some options on where we can find the money from.
Okay. Would this be January's meeting?
We can try to have it by then, but, I confess, Mayor, with the holidays, the work product will suffer some. So we'll work hard. We'll work hard to get
I know
some.
in business, it's always 3 weeks of work and 5 weeks of payroll, I understand that. Well, just give us what you got, please.
Yes, sir.
Certainly understand, but
So we need to come back with a definite plan, of what the choices are, and we, at that meeting, we need to make a decision.
Well, that's up to you.
Well, I may have just lost my train of
okay.
thought. I guess the first question is who gets paid, and then how much do we raise it? I mean, I think the biggest competition obviously is probably within our county, but there is a difference between working for the sheriff's department and a police department. I know some officers that worked at both that told me that, but should we try to match the county, or should we try to match Wilkesboro, or should we be somewhere in between the two? Because Wilkesboro, if you go there and if you match them, they still get the insurance. That's a question that we need to see to answer. Kind of my question number 2 is where do we land? And then that third one of how we pay for it, that's the one that I think that's going to be the toughest spot. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'd be interested to hear Commissioner Parsons' thoughts on that, because I know he keeps up with the numbers and the budget stuff really good. So.
My biggest question is how do you do any of this number stuff outside of the budget process?
I mean, so yeah, Commissioner, I'm with you, and I agree that big questions like this should probably be decided holistically
we do.
with the larger budget question, because we can make this commitment now. We tie our hands when it comes to budget time. And depending on how the revenues shake out, if we've made this commitment now and we lose revenue again, we've got to cut something else. Whereas if we get to budget time, we can consider everything together and decide, free from any encumbrances, what we can actually afford.
It is going to require moving money around. And I mean, I've heard, certain areas, yes, but until you look at the picture, all the numbers as a whole, I just don't see to make an arbitrary commitment of money, and no disrespect, Rob, you and I have had this conversation, you know how I feel about the police department. But, this is, to me, I understand Commissioner Church's wanting to take action. But I also, it's, to me, this is also like strapping the town with debt service. It's committing the town to numbers that once you go down that road, we can't take it back. Those numbers, if we give the officers the compensation, we can't turn around next year and go, oops, made a mistake. Kind of hard to do that. So I would just want to make sure that we knew how we were going to go forward, what we were going to, because there is going to have to be trade-offs. We don't have funds. We don't, $220,000, I'm going to remind everyone that, the ARP money was about $500,000, and without it, we'd have been juggling numbers a lot. And so now to potentially be adding 200 grand to the budget, show me where it's going to come from. And if we can make the numbers work, I'm going to be right there helping the police department out. But I need to see before I can support something like that, I need to see the numbers. I need to see how we're gonna make it work. I'm gonna see how we gotta pay for it and what's going to have to be the trade-off in return.
I'm in agreement. We do need to look closely at the numbers. I want the police department to have everything they need. I want our police department to be just as well, with equipment as any other department in this county. But let's figure out our money, kind of like going to your own savings account, that you know, and let's see where the money sends us. And I absolutely want to spend that money on the police department, but you know, if you don't have the money there, you can't buy things with it.
I've got a couple thoughts. I think this is something that definitely needs to be done. We need to try to find a way to do it. But when it comes to the money, you either find some of the money in the actual police department to help with it, where maybe there's some cuts that can be done. You find it somewhere else throughout our organization, or you raise taxes. The money's not magically gonna appear. Is that a fair, safe analysis? So that's where we gotta find it.
You're absolutely right.
And I've had a conversation with Chief, and, you know, he's got some trade-offs that he's willing to forego to help these numbers work. So, I mean, you know, it's, you know, it's just, but it's just something that I think, you know, it needs to be a little more in line with the overall budget process. That's just my thought.
And Commissioner, those things you just alluded to, we'll quantify and bring back next time, so that'll be part of the package that we bring back.
Martha, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, Rob knows I love the police department, that's a given, but you all are forgetting one little item. And I want the police department to have everything, that's not the point, but you're forgetting other town workers. And if you're gonna raise the police department, you're gonna have to think about other workers, because there's already comments going around.
I've heard.
I've heard.
Yeah, and to
We
be
understand
fair,
that.
to be fair, you're gonna have to look at the whole thing.
I understand, but if it's gonna be tough, we're gonna have to get some blood out of the turnip for the police department. And then we can look at other departments, but I think we gotta take care of this now, because the problem has become chronic, in my opinion. And Mr. Hooper will give us scenarios where we can do it.
And this is not a problem that just happened overnight. It's been going on for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I realize that too, so, but there also, we all hear issues that people have with downtown parking and speeding and traffic calm and all these things, and I do know that Chief, you're about four men short. Yeah, okay, so that's chronic, and the problem is I don't know of another one that's worse, but I think we'll do this first to see if we can do the next one, but by the same token, you know, budget time is a long way off too.
Well, as long as you let them know that this is coming,
It
that you're
is.
gonna work on it,
Yeah.
I think that would solve a lot of
Yeah,
problems.
we need to talk.
But I can only speak for myself, not the board, and I don't mean you, Martha, but the things I've heard, I'm not gonna be threatened
Right,
or
I
held
know.
hostage.
right, but I think as long as they know that you're looking at
Yes, ma'am.
long term, then that's gonna satisfy.
Yeah,
all.
you have to. There's other people that I've heard that have certifications and training and stuff that their pay should be bumped and it wasn't. And just another one was the former captain, David Johnson. You know, do the absolute best we can, but I think I like Mr. Hooper's idea of doing it like that. And maybe we can get by not spending the 220 and just give Chief Thornburg the budget he needs for retention and recruitment.
I think that we do need to look at all the departments, and after I make my statement, I'd like to know how long will that take? With that being said, I do not just subscribe to the ideology that if you have a problem here, that you have to do this to fix this problem. That makes zero sense to me.
You're right.
I don't agree with that. So how long would it take to look at everybody?
It depends on how closely you want the look to be.
Yeah.
You know, we can pull information from the peer cities that we've got on all their other classifications. Compare our classifications to theirs. But you know, when you hire a firm to do a pay study, what they'll do is they'll then apply a factor to it to make sure that if one town has a higher cost of living, that's accounted for when you compare the salaries and so forth. So that takes a little bit longer.
I don't think we need to hire somebody to do it. I think the department heads ought to be able to get with you and work it out.
So if this degree of information is sufficient, we can probably have that in February. Before budget starts, so we know the cost of
So
that.
you're saying by the second meeting in January, you can have all of them?
No, sir, I don't think we can have it by then. I think we can have it by February to talk about in budget time.
But just to be clear on what I'm saying, I do think we need to look at all the departments. And I think that letting them know that we're gonna do that is important. But we've been hearing about this since I came on the board, and I can remember Joe Reagan talking to us about it. There was an issue. To my knowledge, I haven't heard any other department heads come in and say, we're losing people like they are, and that's what concerns me. Not saying that it's not happening, but we just haven't heard it. And so that's why we're talking about the police department and not department X or Y. It's not, to me, it's not about, I want the police department to have whatever it is they need. I mean, I think I've always thought this since I was younger, that I feel like North Wilkesboro has done a good job taking care of our police department. But this is about what I perceive as a liability for the town that we have with this problem, and that's why I feel strongly about it.
So, which one would you agree is part of that? We do the police first and then do the other departments?
I would,
Okay.
just because like it seems like a present thing. I mean, with that being said, I think I agree with what Parsons was saying, and maybe Martha too, like just saying, hey, we're gonna work on this. It might take a few weeks to figure it out. I mean, I would like to have it done sooner because it does seem like a pressing matter, but when you start thinking about all the numbers, particularly $220,000, that starts looking like a budget discussion. Because you're gonna have to make trade-offs. You're gonna have to find that money.
Well, let me ask another question. When's the last time the city employees had a pay raise?
Well, they get a cost of living adjustment every year. Yeah. So last year in the budget, it was 2.5%. And that actually exceeded the consumer price index at that time. But obviously, we all know this year inflation has been significant, up above 6. You said 10. I was gonna say 6. Yeah.
Push your 10 right now.
So anything less than that is like a pay cut for our employees.
It is, yeah.
So 2.5%.
The gas was $1.79 last year, this time now, almost $2.
So
If we, I don't know, if we put, does common sense tell us to go ahead with the police and do the steps like you suggested, and get that done, put to bed?
Well, I think we should definitely move to gather more information. Now, whether the board gives a thumbs up or thumbs down before budget time, I guess that's a bridge we gotta cross, but I think that it would be appropriate for us to keep bringing the information so that this discussion can carry on.
So, Wilson, the thing would be is if the board chose to move forward with this and created this passage of this, you need to tell the board exactly how would you make this work in the current budget, because, you know, we don't have deviation abilities within a budget, because that's what a budget is.
Yep.
And so you would need to explain that if it was passed prior to the passage of the new budget, where would we rob Peter to pay Paul
Yes,
in
sir.
a budget that's already tight as a hat maker?
Yes, sir.
with that in mind, being that we have had some officers out at the police department, is there any surplus money in the budget for this year?
Yes,
That
that'll
you
be one of the
could- you could
areas.
do that immediately if you wanted, and then, I mean, you would, regardless of whether you had that extra money there that could cover it until the budget happened, which that would be good if that were an option. You still have to have a plan that every year you're gonna pay for it. We can't pull out of the contingency fund or that. It's gotta be, you gotta find that money in the long run, but in the short term, that might be a way to do it.
And the other thing to think about that, Andrew, is that if you pull the money out of Rob's budget for the officers that we currently do not employ, then that does not give Rob the ability to hire the employees that he
That's right.
needs to hire that we're down on.
All you're doing is you're cutting his salaries, because he can't hire because he don't have the money.
And
We need
that's
to
that's
get
the
the
only thing
money.
I ask.
We don't need to
It's
take
done
his
outside
money.
the
But that's not
budget.
totally true though, is it? Because if you've had
Yes.
months go by since the budget started and you haven't had these guys working there, shouldn't it be pulling up to some degree? And that might be enough to cover,
It's probably crude.
A
yeah,
little bit of proof, but not enough to.
maybe.
It's
We don't
not,
know.
I think it makes a difference.
Well, if the chief
Sure.
said, I don't have to hire for 6 months, then we can give him his increase for 6 months. But then after those 6 months are over, unless you're gonna pledge not to hire for another 6 months, you've got to then find it somewhere else at that point.
That would be budget time, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I know that what the fear is, after you have budget time, you know, I hate to see it delayed until then. And do the best you can, Mr. Through. And see what we can come up with, and you know, God forbid there's not another, because it means time coming to meetings
Well,
this year.
this is probably last case, and I'm just talking out loud, I maybe shouldn't say this, but I mean, if you absolutely had to, you could come up with a plan that you're gonna start in the new budget year, but if you had to, could you legally take it out of the general fund's balance to cover the rest of the year if they wanted to?
Yes.
And we do have a high fund balance there. This is a complicated situation.
That's something that, so this is why I pulled the financial policy off the agenda tonight, because I wanted to hear this conversation before we approve that. But some of the notions that the previous board has agreed to in that financial policy would discourage using it for that purpose. So technically you could, but it's not considered a best practice.
Because it's a one-time.
Correct.
Well, not to put you on the spot, Robbie, but how many guys have you had out this budget year? If you can make a guess, have you had 2 or 3 guys that are out that you haven't had been paying?
We've averaged, I'm gonna say 5 to 6, with one of them being a high-paying position, the assistant chief position.
I guess what I'm saying is if you have a position that is not filled for a month, ideally, if you hired somebody the next month, that 1 month could pay for that. We're halfway through the budget year. So
Yes,
that
you
that
got-
was my
yeah.
point.
That is true.
All right, then, so I think we can summarize, unless anybody else has further discussion or any other points or any other questions, for Mr. Hooper, Chief Thorne.
You want me to read my summary, Mayor, and see if it matches yours?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got the following scenarios. Cap the increase to folks that are starting at less than $40,000. You want to know how many folks avail themselves of health insurance?
We can't hear you.
You want to know how many folks avail themselves of our health insurance?
That's nice to know that I have to.
Okay, gotcha. A scenario of what it would cost to match the county, and then one to match Wilkesboro.
Well, it might maybe simpler just to do county,
Okay,
because Wilkesboro, we're never gonna get to their
No,
benefits.
as soon as we raise ours, they're gonna raise their
Like I
salaries.
said, they're talking 37 and change.
okay,
We'll see what that would cost, and then anybody that's below that will be raised to that figure.
okay.
And I think that's the least amount we're gonna get by with.
Okay. And then some options on how we can pay for
Please.
it.
It just kind of feels like to me, if we find out that the problem is this entry level problem, then we could immediately address it. But if it's department wide, that almost seems to me like that might be a budget season thing for sure.
Well, you're right. I agree with that completely, but I think that'll be the least thing we can get by with. And that's just putting a Band-Aid on it for now, and it needs just maybe more of a turn, not a tourniquet, but it needs more. So, but then that's something that I think Mr. Hooper alluded to that. And once there's no going back. So I think that if you do it small, you can always spend more later, but see what we can get by with and see if that's strong enough for the chief to do what he needs to do. He has all the tools he needs to recruit. And actually, it's not measured, but these figures, if he gets the budget he needs to get, this should come down. You know, with his retention rate will improve. Yeah, we'll spend a lot of money planning.
Mayor, this has been a good and helpful conversation. I think we have our marching orders, we can gather this information.
And please, this will come up, I hope, at every meeting to have, and I understand you may not have everything. We need to make an intelligent, or they need to make an intelligent decision and vote by January 4th. Okay,
We'll get as much as we can get.
thank you. Anything else in this?
We basically need to follow the money. We only have a certain amount of money in the budget.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure we're being. That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to do these things too, but we can't just make money. I wish we could. Wouldn't that be great?
No magic wand.
No. So I'm very supportive of the police department and going forward with this. But once again, the money.
That's right.
It's kind of funny you say that comment, because making money is what causes inflation,
Yeah.
which makes you need more money.
Just get them, just call, have them print us some money.
Will you come back to us with some thoughts on looking at other departments too, what they might look like?
Yes, sir. We'll put that on there too.
Yep.
Better priority than looking at the police department budget.
I think he means what it would take to raise of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need that money.
It's on the burner, the back burner. So,
I guess, let me clarify that. I was asking, if you came back with, well, this is what we would need to do to find out that information, and it might take this many months or
I
whatever.
got you.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
anything else on law enforcement compensation? Shall we move on? Any Comments, discussion?
So Mayor, can we relieve Chief Thornburg so he can go to the holiday party?
Yes, sir, probably. Thank you, Chief. Yeah,
That's terrible.
thank you for your help.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and opioid settlement agreement. That's Mr. Hooper.
Yep. So I'll ask Danny to weigh in when appropriate, but essentially this is just asking you all to approve the memorandum, the resolution that's assigned here. Essentially saying that the town agrees with the settlement. If we do this, and if Wilkesboro and Rhonda do this, the amount of settlement funds that the county receives could go up by up to 5%. So it behooves us to do that. Again, we won't see any money, the county will get it. Just because in North Carolina, counties are typically the agencies that provide the services that respond to opioid-related issues. So it makes sense for them to get the money, but the settlement requires that they use it to fund programs that help treat opioid addiction and other health matters. And so I imagine that if we have a program that fits the bill, then we could go to them and ask them to fund it. So more on this to come, but hoping tonight that you all will take action, approving the resolution so that we can deliver the good news to them.
Any discussion or any questions from Mr. Hooper?
So you need us to make a motion for the resolution?
Yes, sir.
If you're done, yeah. Does anybody else have anything? No. We need a motion to pass the resolution for the memorandum of understanding between the state of North Carolina and our local government. Have a motion.
Does this need to be worded? I'll do it.
I think that the mayor actually had it, so you can move what he said.
What did you say?
Well, what Mr. Palmer said is, I need a motion to pass the attached resolution approving the memorandum of understanding between the state of North Carolina.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion approving the memorandum of understanding between the state of North Carolina and local governments.
I second.
All those in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion is no opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
And for the last one, we need to look at dates for the retreat. We're gonna move that up to hopefully late January, and hopefully no later than early February.
So Mayor, if you don't mind, the date that I would recommend, just because I think this is probably the earliest that we can, A, find a good facilitator, and B, put together a working agenda, is February the 11th, which is a Friday. I know that might be a little later than what you all hope for, but if we can put that as an option, I think we could probably put one together by then.
Okay, I don't know, I haven't had a retreat, but I've been to work with facilitators and other things.
Workshops too.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not having a facilitator, that would be a deal breaker, whatever.
I think my experience is that you can do one without it, but they are much more productive.
I agree. It's much more entertaining, it's much more open to speak.
When where is the?
Where you gonna have it at?
Yeah, right.
We'd have it in town, but we'd probably have it off-site somewhere, like maybe the art gallery again, we'd find some other place to have it, just. Because when you have it in your same room, folks sort of, start looking at their phone and, have a harder time focusing, so. We'll have it off-site, but in town.
The board, I guess, we decide if that date is good or.
If I can have maybe that one and one more option that would work for you all that I can use to call facilitators with, that would be lovely.
You might want to do it earlier, or is that?
He thinks that's the earliest we can get a facilitator.
Yeah, I think February's fine.
That 11's fine with me.
My wife, maybe my daughter. Yeah. Son.
Is that about time she's due?
Yeah.
How about that?
And Angel, you're good February 11th.
Yes.
Mr. Parsons. Yeah. Everybody. Okay.
So, while we're on this discussion, one of the things we talked about back in August was we have the retreat in March. We do the town manager evaluation in August. And then at the end of that, we talk about kind of your work program for the year. Do you have any thoughts on, like, is that the best way to do it? Should we reorganize that?
I think it would be helpful to have them closer together. Because as it stands, I feel like I'm working on one set of priorities for 6 months and then another set of priorities for another 6 months. And so if we could tie those together somehow, it would be more helpful for me.
How would you do that?
Well, so that's what I need some help from a facilitator with,
Okay.
on how to sort of retire the current priorities or roll them over and then set the new ones. But with that said, my contract expires in August. And so that would be another element of any conversation is the contract renewal. And so it'd be nice if that happened earlier, but you've got until August to make that decision.
So the main purpose of this retreat is to decide what we're gonna do, set goals and objectives.
Well, so in this case, typically the budget is to get a briefing on this town's financial position and start talking about priorities that staff then uses to build a recommended budget. And so if we hadn't had this conversation tonight about law enforcement compensation, we would have had it in March and y'all would have said that's the priority and we would have tried to figure that out in the budget. But in this case, since we've got 2 new board members and a new mayor, I would recommend spending some time during this retreat talking about norms for how you interact with one another and what the sort of board rules of procedure are going to be. And this is why I recommend having a facilitator, because particularly if we get someone from the school government, this is what they specialize in. And they've got years and years of experience working with boards that are new or that have conflict or need some help. And they come in and give you that help. And so I would recommend that I give you a brief budget briefing, just so you'll know sort of what our foothold is, but that you spend the majority of the time working on board relationships.
Sounds like a team building, more so.
You'll do a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, you'll come out of there with some, sort of written, understanding of what your rules, how you're going to get along with one another, what your priorities are for the year, what you're going to work on. Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit of a.
Yeah, I guess, like you said, I feel like that your work program should be lined up more with those goals.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair. And a good facilitator can help us make progress on that.
February 11th. Seems to be the day.
So if it's okay with the board, I'll use February 11th as the target date and see if I can pin down a facilitator. And I'll come back with the next meeting with a report. If that works, then I'll ask the board to officially amend the calendar at that time.
Sounds good to me.
Anything else on the dates? That brings us to section 11, emerging issues.
Sorry, if I could have the board indulge for a few minutes on something that I've been working on, that I've been very passionate about since my time on the planning board. And it was one of the reasons why I had asked Mr. Shepherd to come by. And it became apparent during my time on the planning board that, that when it comes to development in North Wilkesboro, especially when we're so desperately looking for development in terms of multifamily housing and stuff, that we need to be making it so that we're open armed to developers, not creating roadblocks for them. If someone were to go through the current, just to give you a quick synopsis, if somebody decides to go and build, and Meredith can correct me if I'm astray, but this is my understanding. If a person wants to build right now in general business, for example, and there's an available piece of property, that piece of property has to be, for all intents and purposes, rezoned in order to allow us to build multifamily. What that would require is a complete and thorough site plan, which means full set of drawings, setbacks, pervious surfaces, landscaping, floodplains if so inclined. It would require them to provide all of the documentation before they could even find out if they could get the okay for that, which I think is very onus to a developer to spend that kind of upfront finances in order to just get an up or down, yes or no, we'll let you build multifamily on that piece of property. So what I would like the board to consider, and I've done some, I've spoken with Meredith, and I've talked to, there was a gentleman in town at one time, some of you may remember Mark Pegram, and Neil, and they both have been, they both have indicated to me that from a developer standpoint, and I don't know how many of y'all know, but Mark Pegram redeveloped what is now Taya's. He also redeveloped the Tomlinson Oil Building down here, or Cherry Street and 9th Extension, and some other things. So what I would like to do is get the board's feeling towards, there's a couple of ways that we can go about this, and we can direct Wilson and Meredith to decide, but I had 3 basic points of ways that we can look at this. The first way that to me makes the most sense is in, you have 3 basic districts which this would really come into play. One is general business, one is highway business, and then we also have to consider the overlay districts that we have, because most of our highway zoning areas, 268 and 115 corridor, they have an overlay district in addition to the highway business district zoning. I am correct, Meredith, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you would have to make compensation, but the first and easiest thing that I think would be to just create permitted by right zoning for multifamily within those business districts. Now, they would need to be there may be some careful consideration, because in those districts, you also have abutting residential districts, which, if you've got single family that abuts a highway business, which I do think is the case on the 268 corridor, because don't some of those residential areas up King Street and stuff, aren't those? But that being said, that's all devils in the details. So to me, the easiest method would be to investigate just permitting by right, because the things that Mr. Shepherd alluded to were all things that were written into our ordinances. They weren't required by the state, they weren't required by, we as a town chose
To do that.
to do our ordinances that way. If the board doesn't like the permitted by right, one of the other things is if we could streamline or simplify the use permit process. It would still mean that if a developer was coming in to do the multifamily in those districts, that it would come before this board and we could look at it and give them, but make it so that their requirement of documentation, so to speak. Because I still think that if you've got a piece of property and you know that that piece of property is going to be used for that purpose, there's going to be setbacks, pervious surfaces, building density, and all of those things. So there's going to be a section on that piece of property that's going to be buildable. And on that buildable site, do we give them the approval to build multifamily on that? Yes or no? So if you decided that you wanted to still have some control over it, you know, just streamline the special use permit process. The last thing is if the board doesn't feel that they want to do much of anything, Wilkesboro is still much easier on the process for a developer to build, especially multifamily. So we would just at least need to bring the ease of the process in line with Wilkesboro. But me personally, I would like to see us get ahead of the curve and make us look like we really, really want to be a partner with the developer.
Yes, sir.
I'm not wanting to sell the farm. You know, I still think that we can tailor things. This would be, you know, if we were to give staff very defined guidelines, I'm sure that the planning board and staff could sculpt the language so that, you know, we could do this, but this is just my pet project for the coming year. It is one that I think is very needed. I think there's a lot of things in the ordinances that are bloated, out of date, and really time, but that's for another discussion.
Yeah,
This is
one comprehensive report, plan, it's so far out of date, it's unreal.
But this is something that if the board so chooses to direct staff, that we could at least get them moving in that direction and see what we can do. That's all I have today.
Yes, sir. Great points.
You wanna say that?
Well said.
We need a motion to get that moving.
No, sir, as long as there's no objections.
I support it.
But if we had that discussion, Mr. Hooper and I, Meredith, today, that we need to become easier to do business with.
Yeah,
And boy, that was very well put, Mr. Parsons.
yeah, good.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Any other resolutions?
Yeah, let's talk about parking, and let's talk about stop signs and speeding and all that.
Forward, Mr. Church.
Okay, I think this is another thing that's been going on for a year and a half about speeding and stop signs and yield signs and speed bumps. So I have rode around town and looked at all the intersections and everything. And I got some recommendations I think we need to go ahead and do. Because we've done a lot of studies, we've done a lot of meetings, we've wasted a lot of labor. We spent a lot of time in meetings and looking, drawing data, and data don't get nothing done. We need to do something. So I make a recommendation to the board that we put stop signs on 6th Street, F Street, four-way stop sign, and L Street and Euclid Avenue for a starter. And put one more set of speed bumps on Finley Avenue, the 4 and 500 block.
I support the stop signs.
There's nothing that can't be undone, right?
Right. I had thought about East Street too, but if you put them on Elm Street and come down, don't do East Street, because that's too much stopping on the hill.
And that's our neck of the woods, and that's a short block.
Pretty short block.
Short block. So, but I see your point. It's cheap. For some folks who know who they are, it's never gonna be enough, but it does. And I'm on 6th Street often 4 times a day usually. And the traffic is a lot better than it used to be. The police cruisers and the radar detector flasher speed, that is helping. I've noticed, people don't come up and down there unless it's the middle of the night.
Mr. Mayor, may I make some comments?
Please.
So if you all direct us to do it, we'll do it. But I just want to make clear, and I want to say this publicly, the people that do this for a living and that know more about traffic engineering than any of us say that traffic stop signs are not speed calming devices, and that they actually have a counterproductive effect when you're talking about speed. And I can point to 100 studies done by professional traffic engineers that say that. And so if we do that, we'll be going against the science on this matter.
I understand.
Does anybody else have thoughts besides?
I'm kind of partial to stop signs myself, Wilson. Watching people fly down 6th Street. I'm not one to run through the stop sign. I don't know if people raise their hand here and say, I run through a stop sign all the time. I'd say most people say, no, we don't run through the stop sign.
They roll them.
Now, I agree with that.
But
We've seen the school
they
bus
have,
roll.
me too. I do it on a motorcycle. Pull a clutch in, put your foot down, but I do think people do stop long enough to look back and forth. It's always gonna be a problem. The hill, that we got a lot of hills in town. The gravity, people, they get there, just get a little too lazy and forget, or on the phone, on the radio, to get the brakes down to stay within speed limit. So I see your point, Ms. Day, and I tend to agree with you and Mr. Church.
And I do think the rubber things that we can drive over, speed bumps, thank you. I do think people are taking care. They're aware of it, and I think they're slowing down. And we don't even have one that goes all the way across the street.
People do swerve.
So,
So,
Mayor, if I may,
I think we need to.
Please.
so we had planned on making this presentation to you at the next meeting, but I can give you a little preview of what we were going to share.
Okay.
And that is based on our data on the ground here. So not some study conducted somewhere else, but the data that we've collected here. The speed bumps have a big effect on the speeds. And so they've proven to be very, very effective. So just wanted to share that.
With all due respect, though, the sign that y'all had taken the speeds has been right at the speed limit. You have a stop sign there.
We've had it in a couple places. And
So you could,
so it shares that even further on down, after folks have gone over the bump and started to accelerate again, that their speed is low.
Well, this is another item that's going on, to me, personally, wherever the board thinks, we would like to see this begin to get settled and drawn to some conclusions. Personally, I go either way. I think both of them are a big help. Is there much difference between speed bumps and stop signs as far as cost?
The speed bumps are a little bit more, but you need fewer of them. You need 4 stop signs at every intersection.
They're $200.
$800. Well, I don't know, they're more effective. Mr. Church, can you live with speed bumps instead of a 4-way stop?
No, I don't think we need to put speed bumps on 6th Street. I do think we need to put stop signs.
What did speed bumps do?
They slow Finley Avenue down. I can get out of my driveway now, where I have to sit there 5 minutes.
I have a question, Wilson. when say we're coming from, I'm getting Taco Bell, coming down, I'm gonna curve up onto Finley.
Right.
Or if I'm a truck and my GPS is telling me to curve onto Finley, the sign about residential, the truck is already in there. They're already deep in, they're not backing up.
Well, indeed, that's true, but we have a sign further up around the Taco Bell property that has the truck with the X through it. So it doesn't say inner
And I
residential.
never noticed that. I have never, I could not tell any of you that I have seen. I was not.
So that.
I was probably driving like a.
So I wish that sign was better too, but since that's an NCDOT right away, we gotta go with.
So the NCDOT did
Yeah.
that.
So they wouldn't let us put, for example, the one that says entering residential there.
It just looks like that a tractor trailer, if they cut the wrong way, they just gotta keep on going through the
He's
residential.
committed.
Yeah.
Why don't we wait, and next time,
Yes, sir.
next time you do
Yeah, get the
We'll bring
data.
it,
in-
I mean,
On data on our speed bumps and also on the effect that
well,
the
that's
intersection
gonna
realignment
be
has
after,
happened.
after you
We
do it,
gotta get through Christmas.
yeah. I mean,
Nobody wants to be here at Christmas much.
No, it doesn't.
I'd also like to hear from, well, part of this, and I'd like to hear from the fire department and Wilkes EMS as to their thoughts on it too, please.
Yes, sir.
Last year I saw, accident, maybe this year, I think it was last year, right at that intersection at Euclid and Hill Street. There were kids laid out because of kids that got hit. And I was talking to Robbie about it. He said, pretty sure he said there's been multiple wrecks there. Do you know, Franco? Officer Graham? You know, like if you go up Sixth Street, going up the hill with the new stop sign, you go back down like you're going to Second Street, down there in that bottom valley, there was an accident. And Robbie was saying there maybe have been others there. I think the stop sign there would be good. One on 6. I'm afraid that somebody on 6 going out the driveway might get hit.
Speeders gonna speed.
Yeah.
All breakers are gonna break laws.
Yes.
We could just send a sign about that problem.
Yeah.
You wanna see traffic, you wanna see crazy traffic, sit down here.
It's there.
That's- well, Michael just had a point, and Otis, I know I've heard you say it before, is I always say issues is 6 and 8, and then I say Main Street. Speeding in Main Street, I mean, I'm walking little ladies who are 95 years old across the street, and I'm just hoping we're not gonna get plowed up there.
Well, let's put it this way, today, I don't know who the patrolman was, but I do know he issued 6 speeding tickets on Main Street today.
Hey,
And we're gathering cost on what it would take to build some pedestrian islands on that Main Street.
well, we did.
I
did
think when we
a
put in
little
a pinch
pad
point there.
Yeah, so
So
they-
the police station.
Right, so we did,
With
so it'd be-
pedestrian right away
it'd be a
across the
full-
lights that flash, it would help slow down people. Cause people don't pay the attention to pedestrians down
Well,
there.
we had the little walking guy who, you know, he's walking across the street
Mm-hmm.
and people mow him down. I mean, every day.
Yeah.
Put him up, mow him down, put him up, put him, mow him down. So that was useless.
this would involve raised curbs, a bulb out on both sides narrowing the road, and then an island in the middle that further narrows it.
Will the
Which
state
seems
do
to be
it?
like a lot of money.
We don't know. So again, that's their road, but we're going ahead and collecting the cost, just so we'll know, and maybe we can convince them to do it.
If by next meeting, the information that Mr. Parson requested, could be done?
Yes,
The
sir.
next meeting, would it be possible if?
Yeah, all MERS has to, get the board to rewrite the ordinance.
My thing, Otis, just to be honest with you, it's a lot more complicated than that. So this is, you know, this is going to take several months for staff to construct this, because there's a lot of layers that you have to, but it's just something that we need to consider, but there's still a lot of layers to this. This is not something that could, I really, in all practicality, if we got this done within 120 days, I think that we would be doing well, but it's just, I want to try to get the process started.
It's something that needs to be done.
Well, and this, the process being with the EMS, we think of these.
All right, now, Otis was just talking to me about the thing that I brought up,
Oh,
weren't you
sorry.
talking about the thing I brought up about the,
Yeah, about
The zoning stuff.
rezoning, yeah. Oh, no, okay, I'm sorry.
no, I'm sure the EMS, I'm sure Chief Martin and, Wilkes EMS could comment.
Okay, then we have,
We have that.
at that point, we have enough
Yes, sir.
to make a decision.
So we'll bring our information on the effects.
I withdraw my motion.
Okay, we'll make a presentation on that the next week.
Great. Yeah.
Yes.
Good discussion, guys. I really appreciate it. I think we've had a really good meeting.
Well, we're not done.
I know.
Is there any other, we're good on that then? Yeah, I withdraw my motion. Okay, any other emerging issues?
But I'm gonna help us out. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we go into closed session to conduct a closed session according to GS 143-318.11, subsection 8, subsection 5, to establish or to instruct the public body staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating the price and other material terms of the contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease.
Thank you. Second. Okay.
All right, give me a minute here to take us off the
Can we
air.
take a break?
Take a quick break.
I'm gonna stand up.